All right, so welcome to the new View of Safety course. This is part of our safety leadership series that we've been doing, which is part of our free outreach. My name is Tracy Lawson. I'm the president and founder of Lawson Associates. I've been doing safety and health for over 30 years and have found myself on this journey, I would say, in the last 10 years of really rediscovering some of the prior beliefs, and we'll learn that those are called mental models here today, that I held, but I really didn't have a factual basis for. I just believed them because that's what everybody else believed. And as I started learning about this occupational health and safety management systems, I'm going to say probably 10 years ago, I really started to rethink some of my beliefs and processes, and I'm not going to say I'm all the way there yet, but I'm definitely have pivoted and am heading in a little bit different direction and really liking the results that I've been seeing from it. So I want to share this with everybody. This is part of our goal and our vision for our organization. By 2030, we want to use what we call our unique safety intelligence process to put our blueprint safety management system in place and at least impact in a positive way every business in the state to really make our home safer and more prosperous for everybody. This isn't about making money. This is about sharing information. So here's just a little clip of our vision statement. We show this at the beginning of all of these free series because we think it's important you know the why behind the what. We really are committed to spreading information and really changing thought processes. Some of you may have heard us, if you've joined us before, we talk a little bit about safety intelligence, or SQ. So if you've heard of IQ tests, most of us have, that's our intelligence quotient, excuse me, and that's the degree or amount of intelligence a person's said to have. You're just born with it, okay? Obviously, we learn as we grow, but we all are believed to have certain quotients and capacity for learning. Many of you may have also heard of the emotional quotient, or EQ, or emotional intelligence, and that is the capacity to be aware of or control or express one's emotions and to handle interpersonal relationships fairly and with empathy, which is a really important part of being a safety professional or a manager or a leader. And so now we've created SQ, our safety quotient, or safety intelligence, if you will. And that is the capacity to be aware of, control, and express one's commitment and understanding of safety and the impact and responsibility that we have on what's called human capital sustainability, the effectiveness of our organizations and the work that we do, and profitability, okay? And so the process of integrating a safety management system into the workflow, the culture, and organizational management systems and goals with a focus on human capital sustainability is safety intelligence for us. So I'm kind of excited. We are getting ready to actually open the Safety Intelligence Institute. We're in renovations right now and targeting August 1st of 2020 for a grand opening where we'll have a training facility and a collaboration space for managers, supervisors, workers to come and learn more about human capital and how to be how to integrate safety intelligence into the organization. So we're excited, so watch out for some of that information. This presentation, I mentioned already, is wholly based on the concepts that are found within the American National Standards Institute, American Society of Safety Professionals Z10 standard for occupational health and safety management systems. I highly encourage you, I'm not trying to sell anything, but I highly encourage you to find out more about it. So this web page and this slide is actually in your handouts that you can download from the web page that I've given you, and that's in the chat. But I encourage you to go to this page. It explains a little bit about the standard. It gives you some links, and these are the 3 standards that I would encourage you, if you're going to get anything, to purchase 2 of them. One's actually a free download from this link. So at minimum, go to the ASSP.org, go to this link on OSHA management for Z10 and at least get the guidance manual for smaller organizations and some information on how to keep your team safe using the Z10. A lot of the information that and explanations that we're going to go over today are wholly based on this guidance manual. What an excellent document. This is really a tool for safety professionals, for managers, for supervisors to understand more about safety management systems. And again, I really want to encourage you folks to look into this. ASSP also has a course coming up that Jim Howe with Safety Solutions will be teaching. And I'd encourage you to sign up for that too, because I think he's a fantastic safety professional and a great leader in the field of safety management systems. So we've been doing some work with him, and I want to pass on that resource. All right, so here's our agenda for today. We're going to talk about two key concepts. You know, this is a 2-hour time frame for this free webinar. And from this, I'm sure I'm going to develop a few more subjects because I feel like I'm barely scratching the surface. And this is really something that we need to start talking about more as a profession and more as managers and leaders. So the first thing is we're going to understand what is system thinking, or at least begin to discuss it. We'll talk about system interaction. We'll talk about linear versus dynamic systems. We're going to discuss mental models, feedback loops, high leverage performance, and gap analysis. Then we're going to talk about the new view of safety, which is the title of this course. And we're really going to discuss what is a successful health and safety program. And it may be very different than what most people think. We're going to talk about a very important concept, which is work as planned versus work as performed, which is part of the process or the system of human and organizational performance, HOP. We're going to touch on that briefly, and I'm going to give you some dynamic risk assessments that can be done, 3 of them that we'll discuss, and really focus on the concept of learning from work and give a good overview of the ANSI 10 standard to wrap up. So the first thing I want to do as we get started, normally I talk about new truths or seeking to, you know, kind of present yourself and prepare yourself to learn some different ideas, and nothing could be more true with this subject that we're going to talk about today. So I want to start off with just a quick little video on just resetting our mindsets before we start this class. So here we go.
I'm going to give you guys 3 numbers, a 3-number sequence, and I have a rule in mind that these 3 numbers obey. And I want you to try to figure out what that rule is. But the way that you can get information is by proposing your own set of 3 numbers, to which I will say, yes, that follows my rule, or no, it doesn't follow my rule, and then you can propose what you think the rule is. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so here are the 3 numbers, 2, 4, 8.
2, 4, 8.
You don't need to continue the sequence, you can propose a totally different sequence, whatever you want to propose, and I will simply say yes or no, that follows my rule.
2, 4, 8. 16, 32.
16, 32, and
64.
yeah. Those also follow my rule.
Okay.
What's the rule? What are you thinking?
Multiply by 2.
That is not my rule.
What?
That's not my rule. But you're allowed, if you want, propose 3 other numbers.
3, 6, 12.
3, 6, 12.
3, 6, 12 follows my rule.
10, 20, 40.
10, 20, 40.
That follows the rule.
Yeah, I'm still multiplying by 2.
I know. I know what you're doing. And yes, it follows my rule, but no, it's not my rule.
5, 10. 10 and 20.
Follows my rule.
100.
200. 400.
Follows my rule.
500, 1,000, 2,000.
Follows my rule.
Want me to keep going? But do I just keep going? You're going to tell me your rule? Am I doing it the wrong way? Am I approaching this the wrong way?
You're totally fine,
okay.
But you're approaching it the way most people approach it. Like, think strategically about this. You want information.
Yeah.
I have information. The point of the 3 numbers, right, is to allow you to figure out what the rule is.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to give you the numbers that I don't think fits the sequence and then see what you say. So I'll say 2, 4, 7.
Fits my rule.
So whatever I propose is right?
So is your rule like you can propose any number?
So the rule is anything we say is yes.
No.
Damn it.
But you are on the right track now. Hit me with 3 numbers.
3, 6, 9.
Follows my rule.
Oh, that didn't follow my rule.
This is good, right?
5, 10, 15.
That follows my rule.
What? Oh. Really?
Yeah.
I don't believe this.
1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3.
Follows the rule.
What about 7, 8, 9?
Follows. Yes, that follows the rule.
8, 16, 39.
Fits the rule.
Excellent.
But we're no closer to the rule. I want you to get to the rule. How about 1, 7, 13? Follows the rule.
What?
11, 12, 13.
How does this
follows
make
the rule.
sense?
10,
I don't
9,
know how
8.
to do this.
Does not follow the rule. 10, 9, 8 does not.
Oh, so is it all in ascending order?
Booyah.
Okay.
Up top. Yes, first
that
ones
what
to
it
get it. You guys nailed it. That's the rule.
That's
That's
always-
the rule. Increase numbers in increasing order.
Aw.
Numbers in ascending order.
Oh, so much.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 15, 25. Doesn't matter. Any numbers in ascending order. I was inspired to make this video by the book The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb. Now, the black swan is a metaphor for the unknown and the unexpected. I mean, in the old world, the theory was that all swans were white. So each instance of a white swan would make you think, yeah, that theory's pretty good. But the point is, you can never prove a theory true. And in fact, when people found Australia, they realized that there were black swans. What was interesting for me was that everyone I spoke to came up with a rule very early on and then only proposed numbers that fit with that rule they were thinking. I was looking for you guys to propose a set of numbers that didn't follow your rule and didn't follow my rule. I was looking for you guys not to try to confirm what you believe. You're always asking something where you expect the answer to be yes, right? Like you're trying to get at it.
Yeah.
But instead you want to get the no.
You want to get the no because that's much more informational for you than the yes. Like if everything's
No, that
giving a
is
yes.
true. That is really true once you say that.
That is what's so important about the scientific method. We set out to disprove our theories. And it's when we can't disprove them that we say, this must be getting at something really true about our reality. So I think we should do that in all aspects of our lives. If you think that something is true, you should try as hard as you can to disprove it. Only then can you really get at the truth and not fool yourself.
I love this video. It's simple, but it's effective, and it conveys a key concept of what we call scientific thinking, and mostly that we should seek to disprove rather than to prove our beliefs. So I want to challenge you with doing that today. The challenge is to think hard about your own rules for safety and safety management and human behavior, and how easy it is for us to jump to false conclusions and our own desire to confirm what we already know. So as a consequence, our understanding of any subject, whether it's a rule for increasing numbers or a complex explanation for the cause of behavior or incident trending, it's limited by how capable we are of recognizing what is not always obvious and accepting that our rule may not be the rule. So think about how this change in thinking can affect your planning and the methods you use to communicate or teach workers. How might you be blinding yourself to reality, resisting a new way of solving an old problem because of our desire to conform to our beliefs? So the answer is obvious here from this video. Hopefully we choose to see it, right? So I thought this picture from Einstein was a great segue into let's explore some of these myths that exist. I'm going to key on a couple of them today, but we can't solve the problems created by our current patterns of thought using current patterns of thought. We've got to think outside the box. So your challenge is to think differently today and disprove what you thought you knew. Many of us, including myself, have used Heinrich and Bird and the accident pyramid, and I've tried over the years and even some of our classes to use similar concepts that people can relate to in talking about proactive versus reactive programs. I've tried hard not to get hooked up on numbers, and I think we've all even kind of have this belief that we've been taught through school or through experience or through our peers and other influence of frequency and severities. So here's our first challenge in pivoting to the new view of safety, which is rethinking the accident pyramid. Let me give you a little bit of history and background on Heinrich. Herbert W. Heinrich, he was a pioneering occupational health and safety researcher whose 1931 publication of Industrial Accident Prevention, a Scientific Approach, was based on the analysis of workplace injuries and accident data he collected from his employer, which was a large insurance company. And this work, which continued for more than 30 years, identified causal factors of industrial accidents, including unsafe acts of people and unsafe mechanical or physical conditions. Heinrich also put forward what many of us know as the domino model of accident causation, which is a very simple linear accident model. We'll talk about that more. And it's interesting, the work was pursued, Heinrich's work was pursued and disseminated in the 70s by Frank Bird and Frank Bird Jr., who worked for the Insurance Company of North America. Bird analyzed more than 1.7 million accidents reported by 297 cooperating companies, and these companies represented 21 different industrial groups who employed 1.7 million employees who worked over 3 billion hours during the exposure period analyzed. That's a lot of data. The most famous result is the incident-accident pyramid that we know today. It could be also recognized or known as the safety pyramid, the accident triangle, or even Heinrich's law. The pyramid that was illustrated then later by Heinrich in his 1941 edition of his book that here in 2020, people are still referring to, okay? So I want to go through two key discussion points here to start off our thought process change and challenge. And the first is that, which are solid models that Heinrich put forward. And the first is preventing incidents that occur frequently will equally result in severity reduction. So frequency has equal bearing on severity. And the second one is that unsafe acts of workers are the principal cause of accidents. So workers are the cause of accidents alone, okay? I think there's many people who hold that true today. So here's another slide from Heinrich's book, and it is his foundation of a major injury. And here's where you see the 30-29-1, and there's several different variations of this pyramid that have been put out, and we'll talk about Bird in just a minute. But one conclusion of Heinrich's work was that 95% of workplace accidents are caused by unsafe acts. He came to this conclusion after reviewing thousands of accident reports completed by supervisors and interviewing these supervisors as much as 10 years after the relevant incidents occurred. These supervisors are likely to often have blamed workers for causing accidents without conducting any detailed investigations into the true root cause, which would probably have revealed other causal factors like maybe unsafe machinery, management pressure to work quickly, or poor information on hazards. These other causal factors are the responsibility of managers. And it is well known that people have natural psychological tendencies to downplay their own contribution to a negative outcome and attribute them to somebody else, such as a worker. We're going to talk about this later today because this is known as the sharp end of the stick, okay? Frank Bird later continued Heinrich's work, and his work revealed that following ratios in the accidents reported to the insurance company, he said these ratios for every reported major injury that resulted in a fatality, disability, lost time, or medical treatment, he said there were 9.8 reported minor injuries that only required first aid. And for the 95 companies that further analyzed major injuries in their reporting, the ratio was 1 lost time injury per 15 medical treatments. So this work suggested that the ratio between fatal accidents, injuries, and minor incidents, often reported as 1, 10, 30, 600 in the pyramid, and sometimes called Heinrich's law or the Heinrich ratio, is relatively constant over time and across companies. It's important to note that these numbers refer to accidents and occupational injuries that were reported to the insurance company and accidents discussed with the researchers, which may be rather different from the real numbers of accidents and incidents, right? It's important to know where our facts and data come from. More research was done by Fred Manuel, and this suggests that the ratios are likely misleading. It is impossible to conceive of this data being gathered through normal reporting methods in 1926, where 10 out of 11 accidents could be no injury cases. Okay, that's crazy. It doesn't make sense. And when we sit down and look at the numbers and the basis for the numbers, instead of believing them blindly, it paints a very different picture. I want to point out one thing that's kind of interesting. At the bottom of the foundation of a major injury graphic, you'll see the moral. The moral of this is to prevent the accidents, and the injuries will take care of themselves. Okay, interesting. So Heinrich's work absolutely was pioneering in analyzing causal factors that could lead to these workplace accidents. He highlighted the associated costs, including hidden costs that are often overlooked, very important work. And he encouraged managers to think about and invest in prevention of occupational accidents. So this was critical. This was a very important contribution that he made. I don't want to take away from that, but the facts remain that there are issues and questions with the data. Fred Manuel wrote a book on this, actually 2 versions of this, really breaking down Heinrich's theory. So I encourage you to look into it. I'll give you that reference here in a minute. But this was an important contribution that Heinrich made to changing practitioners, safety practitioners and management's all too common view of accidents as part of just the cost of doing business. And that this was primarily a result from the workers or the victims' lack of care, okay? I think we know to recognize that not to be true today, but I do think some of our beliefs and our mental models that we put forth still somewhat support this, and we haven't challenged it. We haven't challenged it enough. So some of Heinrich's findings on accident causality were affected by some biases, and that could be from the data that he gathered from supervisors. Later on, and in this quote that I put on the screen here, Heinrich's co-authors warned, and his co-authors were Dan Peterson, Roos, and Roos. They warned against incorrect interpretation of Heinrich's work, and it's probably more correct to interpret this writing as reflecting in an improved expert and scientific understanding of the causal factors underlying occupational incidents and accidents, than as a way of fixing a gap between what was meant by the author and the way it was interpreted by readers of the early edition of his book. So as we've evolved in our knowledge about how accidents occur and their causal factors, the emphasis, hopefully now, is correctly placed on improving the work system. And that's what we're talking about today, safety management systems and understanding the work, rather than on worker behavior. Heinrich's premises are not compatible with current thinking. They're 100 years old, okay? So this call to action is to the safety professionals and the managers on this webinar and who listen to this webinar to stop using and promoting these premises. We need to dispel these premises and presentations, writings and discussions, and apply current methods that look beyond these myths to determine true causal factors. So again, on our webpage, I've given you two great articles that Fred Manuel wrote, serious injuries, and one on Heinrich and dislodging the information from that. In an article in Safety and Health magazine called Examining the Foundation, a lifelong safety trainer, Bob Lomastro, said that he thinks that everybody's taking to Heinrich too literally and that they're forgetting his big picture. And the big picture is the vast majority of accidents are forecasted before a big accident occurs. We've had opportunities to correct the hazards, but we didn't. James Howe, who I mentioned earlier, he's the head of safety solutions out of Medford, Oregon. He was also a former assistant director of health and safety for United Auto Workers and the chair of the Z10 committee. He also takes issue with the ratio. He says that the pyramid theory has really done a disservice to the safety profession because it has misled people running safety programs into thinking that if they work on minor accidents or incidents, major incidents will go away. And many, many companies are aware that this is not the case. In fact, he said certain companies with award-winning low injury rates have suffered some of the worst catastrophic incidents during the past 10 years. William Edwards Deming, a very famous statistician and quality management expert, who is credited with helping to turn around the Japanese economy after World War II, he believed the vast majority of problems were the fault of the system or management, not the worker. And with all my research, I believe that. Okay. So simply putting pieces of a system together, this puzzle board, as you see on the left, does not necessarily allow for the interdependencies to connect as they should, the puzzle on the right. And this is the premise, the basic way to understand and start to understand system thinking. System thinking is the understanding of the product of interaction of a system. So on the puzzle board, it's linear. And the mental model concepts, which are our beliefs and assumptions that are made, are things like adding all the pieces of an occupational health and safety management system together makes it a system. Implementing best practices for each piece of the system makes it a well-implemented system. Systems are linear. Desired change in one piece provides outcome in the whole system. Problems are evaluated in isolation of associated system pieces. That we learn only from failure. That feedback loops are not defined or understood. We're not sure there's enough data to use for feedback loops. Safety is defined as the absence of injuries and illness, and information is kept to management levels only. This is linear thinking, and it's ineffective. It is not interacting with the rest of our management system of our businesses, where the puzzle sphere is dynamic and represents a successful mental model concept and assumption. Where I make one connection, it loops back around to the other, and they all have interdependency on one another. If I were to pull one piece out, it's going to affect the entire sphere, the entire operation. So a successful belief system or concept is that a system is not the sum of its pieces, but the product of their interaction. And we're going to talk a lot about that today. Understanding the product of interaction and adjusting for positive outcome makes it a well-implemented system. And that systems are in fact dynamic, and change in one piece provides positive or negative outcomes on other pieces that make up the system. System adaptation is considered when fixing problems. That we can learn from both failure and success when we learn from what is working and not working. Understanding of feedback processes and information flow is important in this dynamic concept, and that there should be information to be capitalized and gleaned from your incident investigations, and even data from other systems like your quality product data. Safety is the ability to be successful under varying conditions. And this is really important on how we interact with the other parts of a business. And communication channels need to be open and flow up and down the organization freely. Okay, so two side-by-side differences. We'll keep talking about this. I think out of all the slides that I have today, I feel like all of them are really important, but if I can get you to take away one concept, I would ask that it be this. I hope you take everything, but if this one concept alone could ring true for you, I think you would start to shift your thought process. And that is, a common assumption is that if an organization implements all the pieces of a management system, a safety program, in isolation from one another, the result will be a coherent management system just because we have all the pieces implemented. In these cases, the interaction and interdependency of the pieces are not considered. As a result, they don't produce what we call high leverage outcomes. Instead, we get a collection of standalone programs, initiatives, and best practices that could potentially be functioning in conflict with one another. And I think we see that in the field all the time. It could waste our resources, and it minimizes the positive and desired consequences that we were seeking. Okay. So let's look at some other ways to think about this. Here's an engine. This could be the best engine in the world right here that we're looking at, and it's an essential part of a car. It's comprised of countless parts that interact with one another to create movement and power. If we have the best of each part, it is of little to no value unless the parts are connected and interact together properly. So then a system is defined by the interaction of its parts and not the actions of its parts taken separately. A door handle alone does not make the car operate properly, nor does a headlight or a wheel or a seat or a steering wheel. So a system is never the sum of its parts. It is the interaction of those parts. Here's another way to think of it, and let's start to kind of connect safety program elements into this safety management system thought process. Some of you may recognize these as the pieces of a Rubik's Cube that has been taken apart. So this photo shows all of the parts of a Rubik's Cube that are all the complete parts, but as they currently are configured, they are operating in isolation from one another. In this state, do they accomplish the desired outcome? Of course not. So I just took and I labeled each component with a portion of an operational safety element, just as an example. You could also add in other portions of your business core elements and workflow: finance, estimating, marketing, your communications efforts internally and externally. You get the idea, right? But each component is labeled as a operational safety element. In isolation, they won't achieve total high leverage outcomes we're seeking. I can have a hazard communication program that in itself alone operates well, but if I don't consider how HAZCOM interacts with silica or confined space, or maybe even new worker orientations or roles and responsibilities within my safety management system, it's not going to be as effective as it should be. Take that one step further, if I don't consider how my safety management system interacts with every other core element of my business, it too will not operate effectively. So just by having complete policy statements, I have complete roles and responsibilities, I have a complete new worker orientation, each of these elements stand alone in isolation, not interacting with one another, does not create an effective safety management system. Okay? In order for it to be effective, they have to be integrated, interconnected. They need to interact with one another to perform properly and achieve the desired outcome that we want. So our organizations, safety professionals, management, we must consider not only whether we have the elements required by law and by a good sound safety management system, but how those elements work with each other and interact with other aspects of our business system. And systems are absolutely dynamic. They are not linear. Okay, we'll explore that. So this is a really great diagram from the Z10 Occupational Health and Safety Management System standard that I spoke of at the beginning of this webinar. And this is the new model of Z10, and it shows the nonlinear dynamic interaction of management system elements here. The model looks at the interactions of the different elements of the occupational health and safety management system: support, implementation and operation, evaluation and corrective action, management review, and planning. And the elements of the safety management system interact in different places within the system. They are not linear. So this illustrates that the system then is dynamic, and it has feedback loops that can intersect at varying points within the system. The model also shows the importance of the interactions of workers and management and is a keystone to the dynamic system around them. They are interlocked in their efforts for a safety and health management system that produces wanted outcomes, high leverage outcomes. And organizations don't exist in a vacuum. We have internal and external factors that continuously push and pull our safety management system. And this model shows how that system is surrounded by internal and external content, okay? So improvements result from reducing hazards and risks in a systematic manner, a goal that's traditionally pursued through independent programs that are often not coordinated through common management principles and processes. Why do we operate in isolation outside of every other part of our business? The processes that drive implementation of the organization's management system also facilitate improved teamwork and improved operational performance. It places less reliance on a single individual, hello safety managers, and more emphasis on organizations' processes and teamwork to maintain business functions, even if people change, okay? In addition to the direct benefits of improved worker health and safety, a management system can also yield positive business outcomes, which include enhanced productivity, financial performance, and worker satisfaction. Those things matter. They are natural barriers to the system we've been operating within traditionally for the last 100 years. So here is the linear plan, do, check, act. I still like the concept, but remember, it's not linear as the diagram would lead you to believe. The management systems that typically follow this plan, do, check, act cycle, the intention of this cycle is to illustrate the dynamics of a continual improvement process that we see in the Z10 standard, okay? The continual improvement process system is valuable and it needs to be considered and incorporated, but it often leads to linear thinking rather than dynamic thinking. So this may be the cause and maybe because the plan, do, check, act figure on the left doesn't necessarily illustrate that well. So the graphic on the right is the new way to illustrate the dynamic of this system, the interconnectedness of the pieces that make up this system. And it really allows you to see that the system is not linear, but interconnected. So changes in one area affect changes in another, either positively in a desired way or negatively in an undesired way, okay? This is Russell Acuff, brilliant. I love his work on systems thinking. He's got some great YouTube videos out there. One of them is if Russell Acuff was to do a TED Talk, and in this short 5-minute clip, he really does a great job helping us to get the concept and the basis of systems thinking. But he said that successful problem solving requires finding the right solution to the right problem. We fail more often because we solve the wrong problem than because we get the wrong solution to the right problem. Think about that one for a little bit, okay? So lacking systems thinking, individuals and groups, we tend to apply oversimplified, linear, cause and effect, if this then that, mental models or beliefs that fail to accurately reflect the system dynamics and how complex our organization and our work really is. Some examples, what does this mean? What does it look like? This could be where we improve the accident investigation form to improve investigations. That's not effective. Training staff to improve the quality of products. Is that all it takes? Changing a procedure to make a job safer. If that was it, none of us would be here today. Modifying a performance measure to improve performance. Each of these are well-intended efforts and they're based on simple linear causation models. Solutions seem obvious because the problem's evaluated in a vacuum, in isolation from all the other system elements that it interacts with. It's taken out of context and is taken out of the feedback process. We're not listening to what people are telling us. System adaptation isn't considered and feedback processes aren't understood or defined. This is really important. So Thinking in Systems, this is a great book. It's Thinking in Systems, a primer by Donella H. Meadows. Highly recommend it. And in this book, they talk about all systems have a variety of feedback loops. And so, and this statement from Donella says that we can't impose our will on a system. If that's all it took, again, our problems would be solved. We can listen to what the system tells us, that's a feedback loop, and discover how its properties and our values can work together to bring forth something much better than could have ever been produced by our will alone. We need to listen to all the perspectives and look at all the different implications and interactions to understand how to make improvements or changes and what types of results those could achieve for us. So feedback loops are really important and they're everywhere around us. Sometimes they whisper, sometimes they yell, but we need to seek them. They're very important as safety professionals. These can provide information that can either be reinforcing or balancing in nature, but most often feedback processes aren't understood or defined for a system. We don't know how to gather that data. And so then we don't have an appreciation for or an understanding of these processes and information flow that could make a significant difference for us. Again, the system is always communicating through feedback processes, which are information and data. Managers, however, and safety professionals, sometimes we are often not listening or maybe looking at feedback loops that don't provide the information needed to be successful. Even though we're well-intentioned, this could lead to misdirected focuses on efforts and on resources. Okay. Many of you could probably relate with this next subject here, where we talk about our haste to solve problems. We're always seeking to immediately solve problems. I've been calling this soak time or giving myself space lately. When I have a problem presented, I really need to just stop for a little bit and think, right? I want to immediately, I know the answer, knee-jerk react, and this is what we should do. So I call that, and the system calls that, putting out fires or fighting fires. So that's what that means in the lower left-hand box of this diagram, which also comes from the guidance manual on occupational health and safety management systems. So in our haste to solve these problems, to want to have a quick answer and solution, we often fail to identify relative feedback processes, information and data, and monitor their output. Most changes to the system produce immediate short-term and delayed long-term feedback loops. So before we make changes to the system, potential short-term and long-term outcomes should be analyzed. And so here's some things that we could ask ourselves when we're going to predict the possible effects of changes within our system and organization. So if I, for example, implement a new safety training policy, I want to ask myself, how does this change impact other areas? What else does this change affect? What processes are impacted and how? And what are the potential long-term effects? Does the change improve or hinder the relationships of the system? And does the change produce short-term benefits at the expense of long-term gain? This is very important to stop and consider, okay? It's crucial that organizations who seek to implement a standard safety management system, which I highly encourage you to do so, you first need to understand the existing organic management system. Every company has one and naturally operates within a system. So this means we have to understand how work is completed at all levels. Have any of you maybe seen the show Undercover Boss? I really think about that every time I think about this, understanding how work is completed. And it's amazing that these bosses go undercover and actually work in their own companies side by side with employees, and how much they learn about what they thought and had planned for work to be done, how it should be done and what it would look like versus the reality of how work is done. And this is what we're talking about, understanding how we really operate. Some of you may have heard statements out in the field where like, well, I know that's what our policy says, but this is what we really do. This is that exactly. So we have a naturally operating management system within our organizations. And these systems are developed over time, and they may be developed based on assumptions or beliefs, mental models, I'd like to start calling it, that our organization puts forth, right? And this leads us to the question, is this the system the organization wants? Is the system that is currently taking place in reality the system that the organization actually wants? And management systems are based on assumptions and mental models, and an organization that the organization has established over time. These may not be providing high leverage principles and could be leading to putting time and energy into the wrong things that produce low level returns. And I'm talking about our safety management systems too, folks, not just our company as a whole, okay? When an organization, when we put time and energy into the wrong things, we don't see the results we want, no matter how well-intentioned our efforts may be. The results then can be disappointing because daily activities and initiatives are based more on putting out fires, which are low leverage activities. So because this current putting out fire activity or firefighting activity isn't based on assessment and planning to influence the system in the direction we want, the efforts can often waste our resources and our time and our money. It can also create and foster conflict among departments. Think about that for a second. We're running around trying to put in place quick solutions to put out fires that may have short-term benefits with long-term consequences. Okay, and create conflict among different departments. In addition, they are probably not producing the desired results. And that often, this firefighting quick solution process makes matters worse. We need time to think and to challenge our mental models. So what is a mental model? It's based on a framework that gives people a representation of how the world works, right? And to put it simply, mental models are a set of beliefs and ideas that we are consciously and in many cases unconsciously forming based on our experiences, not necessarily based on facts. They guide our thoughts and behaviors and help us understand life. They're basically thinking tools or shortcuts for reasoning. So I want to show a little video clip. I think this is funny, and this is definitely a great example of a mental model. Some of you may have seen this before.
Again, this is the USS Montana requesting that you immediately divert your course 15 degrees to the north to avoid a collision. Over.
Please divert your course 15 degrees to the south to avoid collision.
This is Captain Hancock. You will divert your course. Over.
Negative, Captain. I'm not moving anything. Change your course. Over.
So, this is the USS Montana, the second largest vessel in the North Atlantic Fleet. You will change course 15 degrees north, or I will be forced to take measures to ensure the safety of this ship. Over.
This is the lighthouse, mate. It's your call. Hello?
I love this video. I've seen it so many times and really didn't put it into this context until I really started thinking about mental models. What were the captain's assumptions or mental models, right? What was driving his actions? He's the biggest ship in the fleet. He takes precedence over everyone else, and he's automatically making an assumption that that is another ship, right? Was he certain that his assumption was correct? He was. But he didn't look for the facts. And I think about myself and how often, you know, I've made assumptions out in the field or jumped to conclusions about things. And then when I stepped back and looked into it further, I was wrong, just like in this video. And so how are we doing that in our safety programs and our safety management systems? Assumptions about how we think the world will unfold have a significant effect on our actions. And that's why we need to surface these assumptions and mental models and really flesh them out and make sure that that's correct and what we intended. So I've mentioned this term a couple times already today, high leverage performance. And an organization can't reach high leverage performance even if its efforts to put into changing the behavior of the system over time. If those efforts are put in without understanding how the system is working and how work is performed, then we're not going to get the results we're looking for. The undesired system further reinforces itself and naturally becomes the way we've always done things. That's the mental models that exist out there. If you find yourself or somebody saying, well, this is how we've always done it, that's a mental model. And these models and assumptions remain low leverage, meaning we're not going to get the results we want, no matter how well-intentioned they are. If we have misplaced efforts, we're going to continue to produce undesired consequences. Okay. So this is the last of a series of videos that I want to show. This is actually referenced in the Z10 standard. It's really good. into understanding the systems thinking mindset. It's about 10 minutes, and so I'd like to show it here.
The famous political prognosticator Nate Silver wrote a book called The Signal and the Noise, and in that book he had a chapter called Becoming Less and Less and Less Wrong. And that's what systems thinking can help us do. The purpose of systems thinking is to help us to be clear about our assumptions, to surface, make them explicit, test them, and improve them so that over time we become less and less and less wrong. And the value of that is we become more and more and more effective. Let me give you an example of this. When my son Noah was 14, I had asked him to take the dog for a walk. So I come back an hour later and was very surprised to see my son coming out of the bedroom with a big old scrape on his cheek. I said, Noah, what happened? He said, well, I really didn't want to miss my opportunity to play Minecraft. So I thought, hey, what if I took the dog for a walk? I'll tie her to the bike. And it was working really well until he came almost home. The neighbor dog, Stella, was Bella's, our dog's, arch nemesis. Took one look at each other, and you can picture it. Noah sailing over the handlebars. So what happened? Well, my son had a mental model. I want to walk the dog faster, and the best way to do that is to tie the dog to the handlebars. That's what often happens with our mental models. We focus on the here and now. Seems simple, but the problem was that there was unintended consequences. He hadn't thought further out than the 5 feet of the bike and the dog that he was working with. When the other dog entered the picture, poof, flying. And that's how we all do it. We end up flying over the proverbial handlebars. Why? Because we don't really think about the implications of our actions over broader space and time dimensions. And that, quite frankly, is what systems thinking can help us do better. Look around you. You'll see many examples of unintended consequences. For years, we've been using antibacterial products, antibiotics, soap. What's happened, though, is that the bacteria that has survived tends to be stronger. When communities face increased traffic congestion, they build more roads. Seems to work for a short time, but what happens is further out, suburbs become more attractive, people move there, and the roads get congested again. Corporations, when they get behind or have profitability problems, might work their employees harder. Short run, they may get more results. In the long run, though, people get burned out from stress, more likely to either create errors, create problems, or quit. Again, negative consequences. And these happen in all facets of life. We use our mental models to take appropriate action. If I want this to happen, what should I do? Where is it the most important place for me to focus my energies and attention? If I do this, what will happen as a result? Those are places where we would apply our mental models. In the case of the biggest issues that we're trying to solve, obesity and chronic disease and other kinds of issues like that, we want to make a huge difference. What we're looking for is what I call high leverage. Let's define high leverage as the ability to fundamentally improve the performance of a system while simultaneously reducing the likelihood of negative, unintended consequences. You can think about an issue as having two attributes. How much change did we generate? And how much unintended consequences did we get? In the place where you make a little bit of change and a little bit of unintended consequences occur, what you end up with are tweaks. Not a whole lot happens. You may be in a situation where there's not a whole lot of change that occurs, but there's a lot of unintended consequences that occur. In that situation, what we have is firefighting. Lots of bumps in the rug. Solve a problem here, and it pops up over there. There are certain situations where you have lots of change, but also lots of unintended consequences. Those are disasters. Certainly don't want those. The place where we want to be is obvious. We want to be up here where we have few unintended consequences, and we've made a big difference. What I call this quadrant is high leverage. I'm going to talk a little bit about how systems thinking can ensure the likelihood that we end up here in the high leverage land. In order to improve things a lot, we need to have a picture of the system, of how it really works. We need to understand the physics, as I say, in order to identify the lever for improvement that we need. So, in order to do systems thinking well, we need to expand our boundaries of time and space, and we need to improve our understanding of the physics of the system. You can think of applying systems thinking as having three components: what you are doing, how you are doing it, and how do you know you've done it well. What you are doing is, first, making sure that you frame the problem with as expansive a set of boundaries as possible. Or as Ron Heifetz says, getting up on the balcony. And second, You're looking to understand how things work. You're developing a picture of the physics. How you're doing it? You're developing a shared picture. You're making sure that all the assumptions are represented visually so that people can be on the same page about them. And how you are doing it? You're also making sure that you're applying a scientific method approach, realizing that there's no such thing as the truth. You're working on, as Nate Silver says, becoming less and less and less wrong. You're really just applying a scientific method approach to building your theories about how the world works. How do you know you've done it well? You know that when you've arrived at a solution or an understanding of the system that is simple and easily understandable and easy to explain. In other words, you've made useful sense of reality by reducing the complexity of your understanding. In order to arrive at this simple as possible shared picture of understanding, systems thinkers use a variety of tools and activities. You can think of these tools and activities as running a range from the amount of time and energy and skill and resources required to apply them, and the amount of value that you get out of them. This graphic that I'm showing here was developed by a colleague of mine, Barry Richmond, and he used it to teach at Dartmouth College how you could think about applying systems thinking. It's an opportunity at the very low end of the spectrum, very low intensity with very little skill, to ask some questions. You might get some value out of that. You could spend a little bit more time and develop some causal maps or stock and flow maps, get even more value out of that, or start building more simulation models, which may take more time and skill and energy, or you might try to build a very large model. People who become enamored with systems thinking immediately begin thinking that the best thing to do is to build these very large models. They realize that it requires a lot of skill, time, and energy to learn that skill and become quickly discouraged. What I'd like you to understand is that it doesn't require a degree, a PhD from an academic institution in order to apply systems thinking. The most important part of systems thinking is the thinking. It's the mindset that you use. What I'd like to do is to show you how you can apply that mindset even without using a lot of the sophisticated tools. So back to what you were doing. The first thing you are doing is to expand your view of the problem. You frame it by making sure that you are expanding the boundaries. Questions you can use to expand the boundaries of inquiry are: what are the trends? Where are they going? What will be the future price we pay? How do we want the future to play out? What's our dynamic vision? To get on the balcony across space, you can ask the following questions. How does this impact more than just the area of interest? Who else is concerned? Other stakeholders. If we make a change here, where else will there be a change? In using systems thinking, you then start looking for the physics, asking how it works questions. There's a set of questions that get out how conditions arise and change. What's accumulating? What are the key conditions? What is the rate of change? In what direction are the important accumulations going? There are another set of questions that you can use to understand if there are feedback loops operating in the system. These kinds of questions include: is there a virtuous cycle, vicious cycle? In other words, reinforcing loops. Is there a pushback in the system? Does it try to stay in equilibrium, often balancing loops? What's happening in terms of these cycles? Regarding how you are doing it, in using systems thinking, you are trying to get everyone to see the same thing, to paint a common picture. You can use visuals and diagrams, of course, and questions you can ask include: do we have the same picture of the issue or strategy? If not, how do we get it? Is it clear and unambiguous? Is it rigorous? And you're using a scientific learning approach, continually presenting, testing, and improving the picture until there's nothing left to improve. And you know you've done it well when your mental model of the issue is as simple as possible. Questions you can ask include: how do we build confidence in the theory? How do we keep it as simple as possible, but no simpler? Is the mental model too complex, and could I remove some of that complexity? Are we able to mentally simulate? Can we computer simulate? Sure, you might be able to develop more insight by using more complex tools like stock and flow maps and simulation models, but those take more time and a lot more skill to do. And simply by using the questions that we've just covered, you can improve your understanding. And this will help you develop the systems thinking mindset, the cognitive capacity to help you to use those tools in the future. Ultimately, systems thinking requires we possess a certain amount of humility, realizing that we can never possess the truth. The best we can do is become less and less and less wrong. We can and should build mental models that will help us to avoid our own handlebar experiences. The right systems thinking mindset will help us do that.
great video on systems thinking. In fairness, I think I've watched that probably 5 or 6 times. You can download it for free on the internet. Just type in CDC systems thinking on YouTube and it should pop up for you. So what we're talking about is really the difference between expectation and then actual performance. And a gap analysis is defined as a method of assessing the difference between actual performance and expected performance. And we need to know what this is in an organization. The term gap refers to the space between, again, where we are, our present state, and where we want to be, the target state. And a gap analysis can be referred to also as a needs analysis, needs assessment, or need gap analysis. It's all the same thing. It's important to identify what the desired consequences for a system are and to understand its current state and gaps. How can we possibly make improvements if we don't know where we really are, not where we think we are? It's important to identify these desired consequences for a system, to understand the current state of gaps, and after we do a gap assessment or a gap analysis has been performed on our current system, we then need to define what positive consequences will provide a successful system for our organizations. So in other words, what does success look like? Here's some questions that you could consider when you're defining what success looks like. What are the intended end results? What will we measure to determine success? We need feedback loops. We need information and data. How will the organization recognize that it's been successful? Why is it important to the organization to begin with? And where will this provide the most benefit? Okay. Before we begin change and we want to go get that success, we have to do the gap assessment. And once that assessment and understanding of intended consequences, what success looks like, have been established, planning the actions the system will need to produce desired positive outcomes can begin. So we have to have this data first. Understanding systems thinking, new ideas and methods that are being developed to apply systems thinking to safety can enhance your application of this Z10 standard and improve safety performance. And this Z10 standard really is an excellent roadmap. So this visibility within this process can lead to the best analysis of how our different systems interact, the interrelationships of our different core elements of our processes and core elements of our business, looking at trends, looking at potential business impacts and necessary corrective actions. Using this occupational health and safety management system will help us identify what is the best for our organization through this gap analysis process. If we fail to include safety and health considerations in standard work planning and balancing, it can result in unexpected and undesired disruption to our value streams. That could be our finances, our employees, our reputation. So here is a visual of the new view of safety, and thanks to Jim Howe for providing this slide for us. And how do we achieve excellence through learning how work is done? So a couple key concepts, and I had mentioned this at the beginning. The first is human and organizational performance, or HOP, these principles. Some of the principles for this that are really changes in mindsets for a lot of people are things like, people will make mistakes. That is reality. Error-likely situations are predictable. I believe we can predict most of the things that occur, especially if we're listening to our feedback loops. All human actions are influenced by the context in which they occur. 100%. How you behave in one situation may not be how you behave in another, and that's based on the influence of the context of the circumstances you're within. Operational upsets can be avoided, and how we respond to failure absolutely matters. How we respond to failure matters. Some of the human error myths that unfortunately were perpetuated by Heinrich, and we've picked them up and run with them for the last 100 years, is that human error is a choice. We're only considering the person and not the contextual impacts and influences of the environment on that person, or of the system and management. If we have no events, then that means we have no human error problems. That's an error and a myth. Training will solve human error problems. No, fixing the system will solve human error problems. We need well-trained and educated and skilled workers, but we need an effective system for them to work within. Accountability and punishment will address human error problems. It'll address it, but it may be negative, low leverage outcomes. Significance of error should determine the level of discipline. So the more serious the event, the more serious the discipline. When a more serious issue could have resulted in a less serious event and results in less serious discipline. That doesn't match up. Experience eliminates human error. Okay? If you've been doing this for a really long time, you will not have error, and that is not true. Human error are the root causes of accidents. Again, system-based, management-based are the biggest issues that need to be fixed. And then errors are violations, and that's not necessarily true either. And these may be very new concepts for some of you that are listening today. So take time to kind of think about this. And again, I encourage you to listen, give yourself some space, and then come back and listen to this webinar again and see how you view it differently. This is a photo from a job site that I actually was the safety director of back in 2004, and we had just gotten the VPP for the state of Hawaii, and they did an article in the newspaper on us. I found this when I was researching to put this webinar together, and I was shocked. I was like, oh, what company is this? And I was like, oh, this is my company. So really, the whole concept behind this slide is that let's learn by studying what things go right. And I'm not trying to insinuate that I know everything that goes right, but this is really important. Traditionally, we focus on things that go wrong, and we study the heck out of that. How about we learn from things success and from the things that we're doing well, and we take those pieces and infuse them into the things that aren't working well either. So learn from people that are doing the job, speak with our workers, understand the job and how work gets done. Learn from successful completion of jobs, and then investigate successful work to identify gaps. We don't have to have an accident in order to do an investigation. Let's identify decisions workers make to adjust to the gaps and learn them and figure them out. Learning from successful work, we could figure out and find some frustrations that exist and be able to resolve that. We could find some dependencies that are out there that we want to either enhance or reduce. We could find sensitivities. We could identify good practices and really learn more about how recoverable our business and our workforce is. In the free handouts that we gave with this series, Jim Howe allowed us to use his Asking Better Questions and Understanding Work is Performed handout. Really encourage you to take a look at that. It's got some good questions that you can go out into the field and ask. So this is the ANSI ASSP Z10 Occupational Health and Safety Management System standard. This is the 2019 version, which is very different from prior versions. And here we see again our dynamic diagram of the implementation of a safety management system. And it talks about planning, and the standard goes through and discusses different elements to planning. It goes through context of organizations and some strategic considerations for a business and safety management system implementation. What are the support elements that we need for a proper management system? How do we implement and operate? How do we evaluate and correct? How do we do management review? And then management leadership and worker participation. These are all key components. I encourage you to take a look at this slide closer, and more importantly, even to go back and get the guidance manual and get the standard yourself and start digging into this more, because this really is the direction of the future. You know, traditionally, when we talk about the new view of safety, traditionally we have defined health and safety as the absence of injuries and illnesses. And at such a lacking, missing the mark definition, because past performance is no guarantee of future performance. And one of the major problems with using lagging safety metrics to measure the health of a system is just that our past performance is no guarantee of our future performance. You know, many companies, if you were to ask, how is your safety program doing? They will immediately go to what their OSHA incidence rates are. And that's really the measurement of failure. To be honest, those are subjective to proper reporting and classification. And they're just one tool that exists out there, but they have become the tool by which we base the success of our program. And over 30 years, I've seen very good companies who've had some incidents. And I've seen very poor companies who say they have zero. So that can't be the metric that we are defining our success by. So many organizations are moving away from OSHA incident rates as the primary measure of system stability and performance. So if safety isn't the absence of injuries and incidents, then what is it? Safety and health are properties of a system, and I'm going to go back to the human body as an example. What a property of a system is. The human body is a system, and it's made up of many properties: a stomach, the lungs, the heart, the liver, your small intestines, your bones, your muscle. You get the idea. A person can see, we can think, we can walk, write, and do a lot of other things, but no individual part of the body does these things on its own. Akoff, in his video about systems thinking, his TED Talk video, says, you wanna prove it? Cut off your hand. Your hand cannot operate alone. Just in the same way, a safety and health program or management system is a property of the workplace system. We've cut off our hand and put our safety management systems off to the side and are operating out of connection and out of sequence with the rest of our organization's operating systems. And we wonder why we're not getting the results and the support and the processes that we want. While well-intentioned, we're still not fully operational because we have isolated ourselves from the system. We are a car part or a body part in isolation. So in our safety and health properties of a workplace system, we're not going to find an individual part of the system, either a person like a safety director, or a device, a fall protection harness, a procedure, or a training program alone being the answer. Safety and health are the products of the interaction of the parts of the system. It's the management system, it's the people, our work methods, our hazard controls, our procedures, our supervision, tools, equipment, and many other factors that include culture, production pressure, resource constraints, and goal conflicts, and system strengths and deficiencies. It is a piece of the system that needs to be put back in. Underneath every simple, obvious story about human error, there is a deeper, more complex story about the organization. The new view of safety acknowledges this, that safety and health activities are not conducted in isolation. The goal of management in almost any organization is to continually increase the organization's product or service output with the same or fewer resources. This is the result of a lot of things. It could be economic pressures that management faces. It could be from internal or external factors. But typically, the most common way to increase output with the same or decreased resource input is to continually apply organizational pressure to adapt, improve, and change processes. This has significant implications for safety and health. It'll affect how work is actually done compared to how it is planned. So traditional safety and health processes in their current form may no longer be appropriate in our rapidly changing, dynamic, and resource-constrained work environments. Many of us have seen or heard about new methods like lean or agile. It's the same thing. Our systems need a new view for safety. Many serious incidents demonstrate that weekly or monthly inspections or audits or annual risk assessment or hazard analysis alone don't identify hazardous situations in a timely manner. You know, this quote on the screen is from Sidney Decker, and probably one of the best books out there about human error that he wrote, The Field Guide to Understanding Human Error. Really encourage you to look into that as well. Again, I want to thank Jim Howe for letting us use this slide. And this is a visual representation of the sharp and blunt end of a stick. And you could think of this stick as representing your organization and your workforce, where management and executives are the blunt end, pushing forward how work should be planned and making decisions and setting forth process results, to the sharp end of the stick, which is the workers who actually get the work done. And it's very important that communication go up and down this chain or this stick in order to be effective. So instead of thinking about how your organization works based on traditional organizational charts, consider your organization as this stick with a sharp and a blunt end, if you will. At the sharp end, again, we have our frontline workers. They're closest to the hazards. They know the work, they're doing the work. And the further we move away from the sharp end, we'll find our supervisors, managers, department heads, and our executives. Workplace, it can look very different depending on your position in the stick, on the stick. It's about perspective. And there's definitely a gap in understanding health and safety between the sharp and blunt end. So we're going to talk about the importance of closing this gap and how we can do that. But just think about how decisions are made at the blunt end that affect health and safety at the sharp end. So I've talked about this a couple times today, work as planned versus work as performed or work as done. And work is dynamic. It is not linear, it is not static. And while I think hazard analysis are an important tool, I have yet to see an organization or a group actually use them effectively. And I think that's because we are missing some fundamental concepts of participation and understanding how work is performed. So when we think about how work is done, we imagine someone designing a job, writing this procedure or analysis, and then the worker performing the job every day the same way according to the procedure. And one of the most fundamental concepts in this new view of safety is understanding how work is performed. So here we have the black line on the screen, and this is the way the job was planned. This could be a procedure or, again, in a hazard analysis. And we want to ask ourselves, is this the way most jobs are performed? If you ask the worker, you're going to get a no. So think about then what are several reasons why the work is not performed according to the black line? It isn't just because the worker doesn't want to. Some people will say it's because the procedure writer, the person who put that out, has never done the job. Others may say insufficient staffing. Some people might say lack of equipment, varied training or experience. The way work is actually performed is represented by the blue line. And it represents the way that the worker has to adapt to changing circumstances in their environment to get the job done. The blue line almost always trends towards getting the job done efficiently. I didn't say effectively, but efficiently, quickly, right? With whatever equipment, whatever personnel and resources are available. You want to ask yourself, is the blue line good or bad? Does the blue line make the job more dangerous or safer? Are leaders and health and safety personnel in your organization aware of how work is actually performed? The blue line. The answer to this question can have a profound impact on your organization's ability to improve its management system, because improvement depends on the free flow of accurate information throughout the system. This is very key. So looking again at the black line and blue line model and the organizational model, the stick with the blunt and sharp end combined, we want to ask ourselves, how do executives understand how work is done according to the black line or the blue line? Is it the black line? They think that work's being done according to the way it was planned and documented in the procedure manuals or planned in the estimate, right? How do workers understand how the work is performed according to the black or blue line? It's the blue line, right? The gap in understanding of how work is performed represents a significant management system implementation issue. Organizations are going to frequently fail to recognize that hazards are not static, they are dynamic. Workers encounter hazards in a work environment that's constantly changing. Some factors, dynamic factors, could be unplanned interruptions, new hazards or risks that emerge to produce situations that we may not have been adequately anticipating when we plan that work, right? This is why workers sometimes make beneficial and needed adaptations in the work, and they deviate from work as planned. Systems that empower workers in communication with management to be prepared for and capable of making these decisions to adjust from planned work are demonstrating safety as a functioning property within a management system. How do we get there? Human and organizational performance principles. These are key. We're just skimming the surface of these subjects, by the way. There's 5 key HOP principles. And the first one is understanding that people will make mistakes. The second is that error-likely situations are pretty predictable. The next is that all human actions are influenced by the context in which they occur. How I behave in one situation may not be the same way that the same person behaves in another. Operational upsets can be avoided, and how we respond to failure matters. I mentioned this all earlier. So what are some things we can do to take away from this deep discussion and some things that start pointing us in the right direction? And I don't recommend you run out and go change and throw away your safety program. We can't do that. We need those elements that are required by law, but I want to challenge you and give you a call to action to go back and study how is work done in your organization and what are some of the mental models out there, and start looking into those and challenging those beliefs, and start with ourselves first, maybe as managers and safety professionals, and see how we can break down those barriers and start to look at how one change would affect another within our organization. So a couple dynamic risk assessments, and the concept here is that risk is not static. It's important and needs to be included in how work gets successfully completed. A lot of companies conduct hazard analysis. I've mentioned this earlier. They do this in an effort to identify and address real and potential risks in work tasks or the environment, and that's good. But these one-time assessments likely don't identify all risks. So the practice of having dynamic risk assessments to continually assess and address hazards that could be introduced or manifested as the result of work is then beneficial. And there's 3 steps that we can follow just to start talking about these things. And the first is a pre-job assessment. And this pre-job assessment evaluates the work necessary to safely complete the task. The next is a work stoppage for out-of-process situations. And while work's being conducted, if we find an out-of-process situation and significant new risks are identified, a work stoppage should occur to assess the risk and ensure sufficient controls are in place prior to proceeding. And then the last is the post-job assessment. And this is the assessment that allows the worker to ensure that the job is successfully completed and allows the worker to discuss any need for procedural changes that could result in continual organizational learning. I really encourage you to also look into the concepts of learning organizations, and we're probably going to put out a webinar on learning teams because I think this is a huge new opportunity to start learning and discussing as groups in a much more effective and productive way. So wrapping up for today, the benefits of learning from work. Well, organizations that invest in learning from work will experience a few benefits. You'll experience the enhanced ability to proactively identify hazards as well as safety and operational problems before a failure occurs. You'll have improved controls applied to prevent injury and illness. Workers will be engaged in health and safety. You'll have an increased ability to identify opportunities to improve operations, not just prevent failures. There'll be an alignment between safety goals and operational goals, not where we currently see this disconnect and in some cases even competing goals. You'll have increased operational knowledge that allows decision makers to make more accurate decisions. feedback on planning processes that future planning can be improved from, and improve trust across the organization, which is huge. You'll have a reduction in unnecessary blame of workers at all levels. That's called the name, blame, retrain culture that undermines learning. And you'll have an increased capacity for resilient operations. So here's my call to action for you. Share this presentation with management. We're going to put it on the New View of Safety website page. I think Nalani can post that address again here in just a second. If everybody looks in the chat box, you'll be able to document that. And this session is going to be recorded and available to watch a few times if you'd like. And discuss this with management and begin to influence change in how you think and how management thinks and how our processes are put forward. We're not trying to sell our services at all from this, but if you need help to get this moving, we're available for coaching. But dig in, start to challenge your thought processes first. And, you know, I've been looking at this for several years, and I feel like I'm just skimming the surface of a new way to think and to really have a team approach, which is what I think we all want and yearn for completely. We want our organizations to be successful. We can produce safely. And I think that this new view of safety really helps set us on the path towards that in a much more effective, efficient way.